Can labor councils be revived? Vermont workers say yes, we can. An introduction by Steve Early. The AFL-CIO reform struggle described in this book will be dismissed by some readers as the product of Vermont exceptionalism. Is it really surprising that the home state of America's most successful socialist politician on the national stage, or its most effective progressive third party at the local level, has also spawned a feisty left-leaning labor movement? Well, as an observer of politics and labor in Vermont since the 1970s, I can report that the organizational upheaval chronicled in Insurgent labor was not preordained, even in Bernie Sanders land. Despite the much changed political culture of the Green Mountain State, it took a very long time for progressive trade unionists to turn their labor federation into a model for equivalent bodies throughout the country. Over the last half century, the main locus of union democracy and reform campaigns in the U.S. has been individual local or national unions. Trying to change the leadership, structure, or functioning of any single workers' organization, not to mention a multi-union labor council, is a very hard task. Rank-and-file reformers have been most successful when they have agitated for stronger contracts, effective strikes, and more militant leaders within their own union. At key junctures, the most successful of these insurgents, Miners for Democracy, Teamsters for a Democratic Union, and Unite All Workers for Democracy, helped win great membership control over the national headquarters of the United Mine Workers, Teamsters, and Auto Workers respectively, when reform slates ousted some or all old guard officials. Prior to 1995, few modern-day dissidents even tried to revitalize city labor councils or state labor federations in the exemplary fashion described by David Van Duesen. These AFL-CIO affiliated bodies can be no less bureaucratic or dysfunctional than some of their affiliates. But structurally, they are just too far removed from the workplace struggles to generate many electoral challenges to incumbent AFL-CIO leaders at the local, state, or national level. Even when labor radicals have objected in the past to how a portion of their union dues were spent as per capita payments to the AFL-CIO, they usually lacked any effective electoral mechanism for changing the controversial program or policy involved. In the 1980s, such grassroots frustration led to the formation of Jobs with Justice, a national network of community labor coalitions which provided a much-needed alternative to moribund, always with these words, moribund central labor councils. In that era, as labor journalist David Moberg reported, only half of all union locals in the country even belonged to their CLCs, because the latter were so focused on banquets, golf outings, breakfasts with business leaders, and photo opportunities with politicians collecting a campaign check. Backed by rest of industrial unions like the Communications Workers of America, JWJ provided real grassroots solidarity via direct action and rank-and-file participation. In Atlanta, Cleveland, and a few other cities, the new CLC leaders embraced JWJ-style activism and made it a part of their official program. New voices in Washington? In 1995, the National AFL-CIO finally had its first contested leadership election in a century. The winners were John Sweeney, president of the Service Employees International Union, Richard Trumka, president of the United Mine Workers, and Linda Chavez Thompson, a Texas-based leader of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Sweeney's New Voice slate pledged to work with state official. Sweeney's New Voice slate pledged to work with state and local labor federations to make their political action and strike support work more effective. As Moberg reported in these times, Sweeney sought the help of the nation's few innovative local labor councils in promoting strategies like involving members more in decisions and engaging in direct action protests, also known as street heat. By 2001, about 130 of the nation's 600 CLCs, representing about half of all U.S. union members, were formally enrolled in a new voice program called Union Cities. However, only several dozen of the most active councils in states like Washington, California, Nevada, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Massachusetts fully embraced the longtime JWJ approach of mobilizing workers and their community allies to help rebuild labor clout. To accelerate the pace of change, the AFL-CIO then unveiled its New Alliance, a top-down attempt to better coordinate the work of the National Federation, its affiliated unions, and local CLCs. Critics of this initiative opened fire on it from multiple directions. On the left, activists objected to the proposed consolidation of smaller labor councils into larger ones, and the replacement of their elected leaders with appointed executive directors. Unions with a history of operating outside the AFL-CIO, like the Teamsters and the United Auto Workers, also balked at New Alliance encroachment on their own decisions, good or bad, about resource allocation for new organizing. Nevertheless, CLCs in Los Angeles, Milwaukee, and Seattle did succeed in fostering more coordinated recruitment of new members. It's about becoming a labor movement again, explained Ron Judd, then president of the Seattle Labor Federation. People are slowly understanding that individual organizational identity and collective identity represent two different paths. We have for so long had an individual organizational path, but we can't win on this path. Changing to win? Such hopes for labor unity were dashed with a few years later when some of, pardon me, good grief. Such hopes for labor unity were dashed a few years later when some of the most organizing-oriented national unions, the SEIU and Unite Here, decided they could change to win by creating a rival labor federation with that name. In 2005, John Sweeney's AFL-CIO suddenly found itself with 5.5 million fewer per capita dues payers because 5 well-known unions, including his own, that being SEIU, had defected from the AFL-CIO. State and local labor councils around the country were then thrown into turmoil about how to deal with long-time local affiliates of the SEIU, Unite Here, the Teamsters, the Laborers Union, the United Food and Commercial Workers, and the United Farm Workers after their national leaders withdrew support for Sweeney's stalled reform efforts. Hailed by some as the second coming of the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the left-influenced industrial union formation of the 1930s, Change to Win had a short shelf life as a new labor brand. Within a few years, Unite Here, what was that? The Laborers Union and the United Food and Commercial Workers all returned to the AFL-CIO fold, leaving SEIU, the Teamsters, and a tiny UFW still outside it. Change to Win has since downsized itself into a strategic organizing center, a modest 4-union alliance that now includes the always AFL-CIO affiliated Communications Workers of America. In 2011, John Sweeney passed the torch to his second-in-command, 60-year-old Richard Trumka. 2 years later, at the AFL-CIO convention in Los Angeles, Trumka highlighted the Federation's solidarity partnerships with immigrant worker centers, the Sierra Club, the NAACP, and the National Council of La Raza. In a flurry of speech-making, resolution passing, and side meetings, left-leaning delegates and guests again dutifully embraced the need for the community labor coalition building, greater union independence in politics, and of course, organizing millions of new members. Trumka's recycling of nearly 20-year-old New Voice themes did not sit well with several influential AFL CIO executive board members. Harold Scheitberger, the then national president of the International Association of Firefighters, denounced any renewed effort to turn the AFL CIO into what he called the American Federation of Progressive and Liberal Organizations. According to Scheitberger, if organized labor became an extension of one ideological part of our society, it would fail in its primary responsibility to represent workers' interests on workers' issues. This criticism was echoed by Laborers Union International Union This criticism was echoed by Laborers International Union President Terry O'Sullivan. He questioned why the AFL-CIO should be forging alliances with environmentalists, who had earned a Solidarity Partner status despite their opposition to the Keystone XL pipeline project backed by his union. "We came here to talk about a new movement," he declared at the convention, "but let's not forget about the old movement." Throughout Trumka's 12-year reign as Sweeney's successor, such old movement figures representing conservative public employee or craft unions wielded far greater AFL-CIO headquarters influence than any liberal or progressive forces. However, 2 years before his death in 2021, Trumka had a rare opportunity to support a grassroots insurgency in the Green Mountain state that featured some new voices who believed that the old labor movement was not performing well locally. These rank-and-file activists were frustrated by the 10,000-member Vermont State Labor Council's lack of militancy and creativity, as well as its inability to aid new organizing, contract campaigns or strikes. So in 2019, they created an opposition caucus called Vermont AFL-CIO United. In a rare contested election, 14 United candidates won, taking all the top officer jobs and becoming a majority, 14 of 15, on the state Fed executive board. AFSCME Representative David Van Duesen, the author of this book, became the new state AFL-CIO president and was re-elected 2 years later, while continuing to work as a full-time representative of public workers in Vermont. Since then, as described so well in this book, organized labor in the state has pursued an exciting new agenda, which stresses internal democracy and transparency, social and environmental justice, and greater independent political action. AFL-CIO executive board meetings are open to all union members, not just elected delegates, and annual state Fed conventions have had their largest turnouts ever. The new leadership's savvy use of social media, radio shows, and local TV appearances has enabled organized labor to reach a bigger, non-labor audience and build stronger relationships with community allies. For example, Vermont is now the only state labor federation in the region involved in the Renew New England Alliance. This 6-state Green New Deal coalition is campaigning for the creation of thousands of good union jobs, building affordable housing, installing rooftop solar panels, cleaning up pollution, and slashing the carbon emissions responsible for climate change. In 2020, the Vermont AFL-CIO tried, without success, to get its parent organization to back Senator Bernie Sanders' second presidential campaign. The Labor Council gave the Vermont Democratic Party a long overdue dope slap by endorsing a far more progressive party candidates for state and local office. As part of their truly unusual outreach to militant members of the state's non-AFL-CIO unions, United Slate organizers helped rally hundreds of rank-and-file teachers and state workers against the public employee pension cut favored by top Democrats in the state legislature and Republican Governor Phil Scott. And that same year, The state Fed also used Vermont's annual May Day rally in Montpelier to build support for the state's immigrant workers. Misconduct or model behavior. In anticipation of Donald Trump's likely re-election of the 2020 election results, Vermont Labor Council delegates issued a call for a general strike of all working people in our state in the event of any right-wing Republican coup. 3 years later, as Trump is the frontrunner for the Republican nomination in 2024, and the threat of fascism weighing more heavily on the minds of millions of Americans, this action was both timely and ahead of its time. In late 2020, however, it was not well received in Washington. AFL-CIO President Trumpka first tried to block any Democratic discussion of general strike contingency plan in the event of a constitutional crisis of the sort, which did occur shortly thereafter, on January 6, 2021. When Vermont labor leaders debated the question anyway, Trumpka ordered an official probe of their alleged noncompliance with national AFL-CIO rules applying to local affiliates. In response, Van Duesen argued the AFL-CIO headquarters to investigate how the example we are setting in the Green Mountain State could serve as a model for what a more engaged, more member-driven, more democratic, more anti-racist, more pro-immigrant, and more organizing-centered labor movement could actually look like in other parts of the country. As readers will discover, this tug-of-war had a happy ending. Vermont AFL-CIO reformers survived the threat of a national takeover of their council that would have resulted in the removal of elected leaders and the replacement by a Trumpka appointee. Relations with AFL-CIO headquarters under Trumpka's successor took a turn for the better. But the national AFL-CIO still wasn't singing the praises of this Green Mountain insurgency, despite 3 decades of convention resolutions passing and new program unveiling about the need for CLC revitalization. In 2023, the insurgency continued even after the author stepped down as Labor Council president and supported Katie Harris, now Katie Maurice, as his successor. Harris is a 31-year-old AFS-CME activist and Democratic Socialist of America member who works as a mental health worker in Burlington. In a hotly contested and relatively close race, Harris and her running mate, Ellen Kay, were elected president and executive vice president, respectively. Their united slate won a majority of the seats on the executive board, an outcome that Harris hailed as affirmation of our desire to continue to focus on rank-and-file organizing within the state of Vermont over political lobbying. Kay, who is co-president of an AFT-affiliated campus workers union at the University of Vermont, believes, "We've made history here in Vermont by electing a 3-woman leadership team, which includes Danielle Bombardier, a working electrician who serves as secretary-treasurer." At the convention, it was reported with pride that new organizing and a major affiliation with the long independent Vermont State Employees Association had doubled AFL-CIO membership in Vermont since 2019. This impressive record of internal democracy and organizational growth offers a lesson for all trade unionists who would like to improve their local labor council. Do not look up, as in inside the Beltway, for top-down solutions. The power to make change is in your own hands at the city or state level. You will find this book to be a unique and invaluable guide to uniting the best of organized labor, old and new, to meet the challenges facing labor in Vermont and every other state. And there we go. Thanks for checking this out. We'll be back to cover the next part later on.